Hello. Today is December the 20th, and you're watching Just Saying, which actually is a spin-off of the Tell It Like It Is show. It's just supposed to be a short segment in which I'll comment on some of the things of the day, so to speak, that people should know about. The first one was only done a couple of weeks ago on December 5th, and actually it was pretty much on the same subject that I'll talk about today. The one on December 5th was regarding the community meeting that was called by Chairman of the Bedford Town Council, Bill Dermody, and presumably the rest of the council, in which they decided that they absolutely had to have a public forum to drag in the police chief and other members of the police department to give the public more information on the Casada home invasion on 7 Proclamation Court in Bedford a couple of weeks before that. Now, actually, that whole public thing was ridiculous because there had already been a press conference in which the chief divulged as much as he could reasonably be expected to divulge, and there also was a community meeting held in the Proclamation Court neighborhood for all of the residents in the area surrounding that home to alleviate any fears that they might have that there was something going on in the neighborhood that they really had to be concerned about or lose sleep over every night. And yet, the council, in their, I would say, lack of wisdom, decided that they would go ahead with this public forum. I had quite a bit to say about that on that December 1st segment of Just Saying, because I felt as though what the council did was unnecessarily create a public uproar surrounding the whole home invasion and unnecessarily instilling fear in people, because we heard very clearly from the get-go from our police chief that there was not a madman loose in Bedford, that there was no need for people to be frightened, that everybody need to just go around and do their normal business, but obviously take the regular safety precautions like locking your doors and maybe having an outside light on in the evening, that kind of thing that we all do anyway. But certainly no need for people to panic. But in any event, Chairman Dermody went ahead with that, and to my mind interfered with a police investigation by expecting more information. You know, police departments know what they're doing, and an active investigation involves them playing it pretty close to the vest. You do not give out information. You have to conduct your investigation with a high degree of security, and not secrecy certainly, but decorum and caution. I also felt as though such a public forum could ultimately compromise future court proceedings after a perpetrator or perpetrators had been caught and were being brought to trial. And again, all of us know, even if we're just casual readers of newspapers about cases that make the news, that nobody puts out all of the points of a case prior to it going to trial. There's a very good reason for that. Prosecutors are not going to put out every fact on the table before a court date for many reasons, not the least of which is, why would you give the attorney for the accused all kinds of ways to try to show his client, who probably is guilty, as being innocent? I think, though, what bothered me more personally was the fact that calling this community meeting to assure the public, to me, what we had the council do was really cast a shadow on the police department. It was almost publicly suggesting, gee, they haven't done their job, so we need to get to the bottom of this and let Bedford residents know that we, the council, is making sure that the police department does what they're supposed to do. And I mean, that was just ludicrous, because we have a police department with professionals from one end to the other, a police chief with more experience than any council member could possibly even understand. Essentially, what they did was throw the police chief, John Brafonsky, under the bus. They put him in a public situation where questions would be asked that council members knew in advance he could not possibly answer because an investigation was going on. So, I mean, does that sound supportive of the chief, or does that sound like putting the chief in a firing line position where no matter what he said, there would be critics saying he didn't tell us enough, which of course is exactly what happened that night and afterwards. Thankfully, most residents in Bedford thought it through and know that the chief did exactly what he should do under the circumstances. But that's no thanks to our town council. They threw him under the bus. They contributed to the media circus. Our councilors, who just hate to hear anything negative about Bedford, hate to see anything in a newspaper or a television broadcast or a radio broadcast that says something that Bedford is less than this perfect little bubble, essentially brought more attention to Bedford. And one of the reasons they did is because I think most media people recognized it was an act of buffoonery having that public conference. But what's even worse is by getting some people in town fired up and some people in town afraid that there were things happening for which they did not have correct answers and so on, they jeopardized every cop we have in town. You know, when people get worked up, sometimes they don't act with full thought. Is it possible that if somebody heard a strange noise in the middle of the night or saw a shadow, go by their window or whatever, that could very well be a Bedford police officer doing his job and continuing on with the investigation and patrolling the neighborhood to make sure that it's safe for Bedford residents? Is it possible that that noise or that shadow or whatever it would take would have a Bedford resident come racing out of the house with his shotgun or his handgun or whatever and maybe inadvertently shoot a police officer? It's happened. It's happened before. Did our council even think about that? I would say absolutely not. Or they wouldn't have put our police in that position to begin with. Well, they had their meeting. I did not personally go. I watched it on BCTV. Probably a lot of you did too. I think most of the people who will see this broadcast weren't there, because if you saw a full shot of the Bedford High School Theater, there was hardly anybody there. I mean, it was mostly empty seats. Now, the media reported, roughly about 4 dozen people. Well, I couldn't count all the people fast enough in the shots they showed of the audience, but there weren't 4 dozen. And if you wanted to count every head, maybe there might have been 3 dozen, but that would have included the town council members, 7, the town manager, 1, several members of the police department, as well as the media folks. So the actual number of Bedford residents who were there responding to the council's supreme concern for them were very, very few. And I suspect not a whole lot of people watched it on television either. As a matter of fact, I get around town. I belong to a lot of things. I go to a lot of meetings and events, and this time of year, a lot of Christmas parties and such. And do you know I haven't heard one single person say that they watched it? And a couple of people, when I asked them what they thought about it, they kind of rolled their eyes and laughed. And basically said, what in the heck was the council thinking? Which, of course, has been my question all along. Now, at that hearing, and since then, there's been a letter to the editor or two, that there are a couple of people who are still saying, we need more information. In fact, if you remember back correctly, there was somebody who said they wanted heartfelt information from the police chief. Heartfelt. But most people understand the need for discretion. We had a few people complain about how long it took the police department to respond and to act at the proclamation court address, because the chief, when pinned down, mentioned times during the public meeting. People questioned it. And let's go back. The chief said that it was exactly 2 minutes from when the police department dispatch got that first call that there was trouble in Proclamation Court to when the first officer rolled up to the door in his cruiser. 2 minutes. How could anybody possibly find fault with that? But we did have people, including our council chairman, Bill Germany, carrying on that it took approximately 30 minutes before the police were able to actually enter the house, and questioning that. You know, that only goes to show how little they know about police work. 30 minutes was an extraordinarily short amount of time for the police to come into that neighborhood in what you could say was the middle of the night, pitch black, wooded area, where anybody could be hiding, with no knowledge of whether or not there was one or more persons in the house. They couldn't just come in and storm down the door with guns blazing. They had a lot of things to consider. They had to know a little bit about the inside of that house. You can't just go storming in and not have any idea if when you open the door you're running into the front closet, for God's sakes. So not only did they have to ascertain the property itself, they also had to search the area to make sure that there was not a perpetrator in the surroundings, standing there with a gun or a knife or God knows what, who could put a lot of people in danger. They had to consider that there were nearby neighbors and make sure that the situation was such that no neighbor or a neighbor's child could be inadvertently injured, taken hostage, or any number of bad situations. I mean, elementary. They had to make sure that they were not sending police to go crashing into a house to maybe wind up with a bullet in their head. And that's happened. It happens all over the country all the time. They had to make sure that the fire department and the EMT personnel who were also there were protected. And then finally, when those things that were absolutely essential, absolutely correct, absolutely professional, they then made it into the house. And they were able to get in there and recover the residents that were in that home without further incident. They were able to recover them without further imperiling them, because what if a perpetrator or perpetrators were still in the house when the police arrived? What direction could that have taken? We may have had a dead man and a dead baby, instead of an injured man and a perfectly safe baby. I guess our councilors didn't think that through, or at least one of them, Chairman Dermody, didn't. So they were able to get in there, do a full recovery, while keeping everybody else who was involved safe, which was absolutely the correct thing to do. Most of us recognize that the police are professional and knowledgeable and know how to make the right decisions. And let us not forget that not only were the Bedford police involved, but as this played out, we had the state police involved. We had police personnel from some of our neighboring towns involved because of mutual aid that we all participate in. Ultimately, we had the FBI and the DEA involved. Yet, we have a town council chairman who doesn't seem to have any trouble suggesting that all of these people are incompetent, need to be questioned, need to answer silly questions that he's raising. So, did it drop after that? Did Chairman Dermody and the rest of the council finally recognize that maybe they just should have stayed out of things? 2 weeks later, what do we learn? The council is once again interfering. On Tuesday, a notice went out that there was going to be a special town council meeting on Thursday night, December 20th, which actually would have been tonight, at 7 p.m., at which time they would address the police response time during last month's reported home invasion at 7 Proclamation Court. I mean, this has already been talked to death, and yet, bingo, they're back. And they're summonsing in the chief of police, and I don't know how many other department members, for this so-called independent review of their actions that night, and didn't even bother to tell us who supposedly is going to conduct this independent review. Well, You know, I heard that and I was momentarily stunned. In fact, I almost did not look at the agenda of the meeting or pay any attention to the meeting notice because there was not a council meeting scheduled for this week. So I thought, well, they're just sending out an early one for the upcoming January meeting. And as I said, I almost didn't even look at it. But when I did, I was stunned. I mean, I was flabbergasted. I thought, I cannot believe that they are doing something this foolish again. So at 10:04 Wednesday morning, yesterday, I sent an email to Chairman Dermody. And of course, we all know he loves getting emails from me. In the email, I asked him several questions, and I'll read them to you. Number one, what exactly is the purpose of this public meeting? Number two, what is the council's justification for a public review of the police department response? Number three, whom is or are the person or persons conducting the review? Number four, specifically, what questions have been asked by the council for which answers are expected through this review? Number five, what immediacy has been attached to the timing of this whole council meeting, given the fact that it would be conducted in the absence of the town manager, because the council was well aware of the fact that from the latter part of this week, the town manager, would be out of town. And number six, my question was, have all council members requested this council meeting? If not, it would seem appropriate to disclose the council members who have. Well, I didn't hear from Chairman Dermody right away, and frankly, I didn't know if I ever would, because he usually ignores my emails, as I said. But finally, at 6:33 p.m. yesterday, last night, I got an email from him with a two-word response: meeting canceled. Well, I mean, I already knew that because at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that was reported in Patch. Well, anyway, that was Chairman Dermody's answer. So 6 minutes later, I sent him another email in response, and I did thank him for responding to me because of the fact he usually doesn't. However, I did add on another sentence, which is this, quote, however, I'm sure that you know that my questions still stand. Would love to hear from you again with a response to them, end quote. Well, I waited all night, and here it is at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning. So he's had a lot of time to respond, and I haven't gotten any answer. And, you know, I'm kind of guessing that I won't. So let's talk about the Patch article that was in that reported the cancellation. Councilor Dermody suggested that the subject will come up again, and possibly at their council meeting on January 9th, which of course is a budget hearing, or the one after that. I believe off the top of my head that one is scheduled for January 23rd. And Dermody was quoted as saying that this whole meeting, this council meeting, special council meeting, was planned, quote, in direct response to overwhelming residential concern generated following Bedford Police Chief John Brofonsky's description of the timeline of the night of the incident, end quote. Now remember, 2 minutes for the cruiser to get there, about 30 minutes before full recovery was made of the victims and the neighborhood was protected. The timeline. He then went on to say, quote, the council has heard a lot of complaints and concerns about why it took so long, end quote. Are you kidding me? Took so long? And then he went on to say that he and his fellow councilors have been, quote, inundated with emails and calls, end quote, thereby justifying his fast action to have this special council meeting tonight. I mean, incredible. You know, I had a blog in Patch this morning, And I said that, since Chairman Dermody is just so involved in details, that I think he needs to tell us exactly how many telephone calls and emails that he and other councilors received. How many Bedford residents are carrying on besides himself? I really don't think there are very many, if any. And, I kind of compared that to the police department, who I know absolutely could tell you exactly how many calls and or emails they have received. And you know what? I don't think they've gotten many either. But Chairman Dermody claims they were all inundated. I don't know. Maybe we should. I got an idea. How about if we file a right-to-know request, asking them for copies? We won't be able to get the phone calls, but we could ask them for copies of all of the emails that the council members had received, because I suspect that most of the emails would have gone to their town email addresses rather than their personal email addresses, which therefore I think would fall under right to know. Wouldn't it be interesting? But somehow, since they're pretty good at ignoring right to know requests, which I could talk about in a whole nother show, they'd probably ignore the right to know requests too, because after all, they have to protect the scores of Bedford residents who are inundating them with emails. Well, let me ask you this. Do you think that knock down the doors, shoot 'em up Dermody is acting alone on this? Or do you think the whole council's involved? I suspect that two councilors, namely Councilor Peterson and Councilor Mack, and are not raising these questions. And I think they are not because they have professional military backgrounds. So therefore, a very, very clear understanding of necessary procedures, particularly by official bodies. So I can't imagine that either one of them are raising a commotion over this. So far, I have not heard a single negative comment, either through a quote or through watching a meeting or reading newspaper reports. I have not heard a single negative comment about the police department from Councilors Scanlon, Longville, or Jean. And it would seem as though they are in support of our police department. So who does that leave? That leaves Town Councilor Chris Bandazian, who happens to be vice chairman of the council. Have you noticed he's been very quiet? I have. Does he have some influence over whether the chairman would go forth with this? Sure he would. He's vice chairman of the council, and from what I understand, would like to be the next council chairman. So do I think that Chairman Dermody, Vice Chairman Bandazian is in on this with Councilor Dermody? Yeah, I do. Well, let's see if he denies it. I don't know. Maybe he just will stay silent. But I do think that we do have some rational council members. And I would like to think that we have at least 5 rational ones, hopefully. But whether it's 1 or 5 who are rational, I think that those individuals certainly are able to recognize, like many of us can, that Dermody is playing to the criticisms of only a few people in Bedford. Because again, there's no public outcry going on. There are not people running through town wringing their hands and holding their ears and rubbing their foreheads that they're hysterical, that we're all in danger. It just isn't happening. I think they recognize that Chairman Dermody is giving every appearance lately of being involved in a witch hunt of the police department. I mean, think about it. I think that they can recognize that we have a very professional police department, well-trained, well-equipped, up on every latest tactic, led by a police chief that has a volume, just a massive amount of experience in places a whole lot bigger than Bedford. and on issues a whole lot bigger than those that exist in Bedford. I think that they recognize that Dermody, through his actions, is casting doubts and is casting suspicion on our Bedford Police Department. I mean, for God's sakes, he's insinuating all over the place that they haven't done their job. I think that they recognize that he has thrown the chief under the bus, so to speak, not once, but now twice. And why would he do that? Why would he take a chief who has 100% done his job, who has responded to this incident in every way that's proper and appropriate, and has remained resolved to keep his professional attitude and not fall prey to hysterical people who say, "We need your heartfelt answers"? I think that some council members, and again, I hope 5 of them, are able to recognize that questioning the knowledge and competence of Chief Brofonsky, of the next in command, Captain Dan Dwitty, and the rest of the command staff, of the night shift boss, Lieutenant Mike Benuck, and every other member of the police department on that night, who are on and off duty on that night and every night, is wrong. It's just plain wrong. And I really do believe that at least one of them has to recognize that Dermody is right now the most destructive force to the morale of the members of the Bedford Police Department in existence. Do we need to be concerned about this? Yeah, I believe we do. I believe, let me put it right out there, since you know how I like to tell it like it is. I think it's time that Chairman Dermody gave up his gavel. I think it's time that he recognized that the best public service that he could give to Bedford residents is to step down from the council, because you know what? He's out of control. He's becoming an embarrassment to us. He's becoming a detriment to one of our most important departments in the town, that is the police department. And he is unnecessarily and wrongly riling up people who aren't sitting down and recognizing that, you know what, things are okay in Bedford and our police department is doing its job. And, Chairman Dermody hasn't done his job, because if he's so inundated with phone calls and emails, then that's clear proof that he's screwed up on how he has handled this, and he has caused those phone calls and emails to be sent him. He has not let the police department do their job, and he seems to be continuing on in this quest. Why? I don't know. Is he trying to prove to us that he's somehow relevant to us? Well, if that was his motivation, he's failed poorly, because all I'm seeing is every reason to make sure that he does not continue as town council chairman or as a member of the town council. He's out of control, and he's not acting in our best interest. And he has become an impediment to what needs to happen in Bedford. So there it is. Maybe you don't agree with me. Maybe you'll get mad at me. But look at the whole situation. What is going on is preposterous. And if we do not rise up and demand that it stop, then our out-of-control council chairman will keep up with his nonsense. And, unfortunately, it won't be just limited to the police department. God only knows where he'll go next, and it has to stop. Just saying. See you next time. Bye-bye.